Everyone had a great weekend. Good afternoon. Before I begin, I wanted to introduce the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Mick Mulvaney, to talk to you a bit about the President's budget. When Director Mulvaney is finished, we will allow him to take a few questions and then resume the briefing and all the fun that goes with it. So without any further ado, Director Mulvaney.
Thanks very much. I want to talk for a few minutes about the budget blueprint that most of you know the President started speaking about this morning with the governors. I'll talk a little bit about what it is and what it isn't, and then talk about where we are in the budget process and what it looks like from here. First of all, what this isn't. This is not a full-blown budget. That will not come until May, so you're not going to see anything in here that has to do with mandatory spending, entitlement reforms, tax policies, revenue projections, or the infrastructure plan. This blueprint was never going to be that, as I made clear during my Senate confirmation. It is a top-line number only. As for what it is, these are the President's policies as reflected in top-line discretionary spending. To that end, it is a true America First budget. It will show the President is keeping his promises and doing exactly what he said he was going to do when he ran for office. It prioritized rebuilding the military, including restoring our nuclear capabilities, protecting the nation and securing the border, enforcing the laws currently on the books, taking care of vets, and increasing school choice. And it does all of that without adding to the currently projected FY 2018 deficit. The top-line defense discretionary number is $603 billion. That's a $54 billion increase. It's one of the largest increases in history. It's also the number that allows the President to keep his promise to undo the military sequester. The top-line non-defense number will be $462 billion. That's a $54 billion savings. It's the largest proposed reduction since the early years of the Reagan administration. The reductions in non-defense spending follow the same model. It's the President keeping his promises and doing exactly what he said he was going to do. It reduces money that we give to other nations. It reduces duplicative programs, and it eliminates programs that simply don't work. The bottom line is this: the President's going to protect the country and do so in exactly the same way that every American family's had to do over the last couple of years, and that's prioritize spending. The schedule from here, these numbers will go out to the agencies today in a process that we describe as pass back. Review from agencies are due back to OMB over the course of the next couple of days, and we'll spend the next week or so working on a final budget blueprint. We expect to have that number to Congress by March 16th. That puts us on schedule for a full budget, including all the things I mentioned this one does not include, with all the larger policy issues in the first part of May. So with that, I'll take a couple of questions. Yes, sir.
Mr. Director, in order to get to your top line on the rest of the non-discretionary, or rest of the discretionary budget, if you're not going to touch veterans' benefits, you need to slice about 12% off of the rest of government. Can you do that without affecting the services that government provides for the American?
Sure, and that's part of what this process is this week. Okay, what we're doing, the numbers go out, and the numbers, each agency will get its top line number, along with recommendations from OMB as to how we think they can hit that number. And they may come back to us and say, yeah, we think that's a good way to reach that number. Or they may come back to us with other suggestions. That's what this process is. I think it's fairly unusual for us to be coming to you this early in the process, but we want to let everybody know exactly where we were.
But we're not talking about 2 or 3%. I mean, we're talking about double-digit reductions, so that's a lot.
And there's going to be a lot of programs that, again, you can expect to see exactly what the President said he was going to do. Foreign aid, for example. The President said we're going to spend less money overseas and spend more of it here. That's going to be reflected in the number we sent to the State Department.
Thank you very much. One quick follow on foreign aid. That accounts for less than 1% of overall spending, and I just spoke with an analyst who said even if you zero that out, it wouldn't pay for 1 year of some of the budget increases that are being proposed right now. So how do you square that? And also, why not tackle entitlements, which are the biggest drivers, especially when a lot of Republicans over the years have said that they need to be taxed?
Sure. On your foreign aid, it's the same answer I just gave, which is, yes, it's a fairly small part of the discretionary budget, but it's still consistent with what the President said. When you see these reductions, you'll be able to tie it back to a speech the President gave or something the President has said previously. He's simply we are taking his words and turning them into policies and dollars. So we will be spending less overseas and spending more back home. I forgot your second question.
On entitlements.
Entitlements,
Why
yeah,
not
because
address entitlements, which is the biggest driver
Very
of spending?
unusual to, this is a budget blueprint, what some folks used to call a skinny budget, and it would not be at all unusual for larger policy decisions, including tax reform revenue projections, not to be included in this budget. That will come in.
Down the line, hold on. So down the line, could we see some
A
type of
full budget would
attempt to
contain
deal with
the
entitlements?
entire spectrum of the president's proposed policy changes.
Director, on rebuilding the military, can you talk a little bit about more of the breakdown of that? Can you go into a little bit more?
No, I can't, because again, where we are in this process is that the number is going to the DOD today, and over the course of the next 10 days to 2 weeks, we'll be coming up with those types of details. I got time for one more. Yes, sir.
You'd be asking the military, you're going to increase the military budget, but you're going to at least ask the people in the Defense Department to take a look at their budget and say, hey, where can we at least cut or at least look and make sure that we're spending the right amount of money? Part of that is going to be part of the process?
Well, absolutely. That's part of what Secretary Mattis and I have already talked. He's interested in driving more efficiencies into the Defense Department. OMB is also going to be involved with him on the procurement process. All of that will be incorporated in our larger budget in May.
So it's not just like a blanket, here we're going to throw money at you, do what you
No,
want.
sir. No, sir. Last one.
Does this account for spending for the president's wall, either in the $30 billion you've heard or if you're going to request for this year or the $54 billion increase? Does that include money for the wall, how to pay for the wall?
Yeah, it'd be more likely, a little bit of both. We do expect to include some money in a future supplemental for 2017 for the wall, and the 2018 budget will also contain some longer-term dollars for that.
Split up between the two.
I believe that's going to be the case. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Director. So let me get back to, I'll be right there in a second, April. This morning, the President dropped by the National Governors Association meeting where 49 governors from both states and territories joined cabinet members and senior White House staff to discuss where they can work together to rebuild the country and restart the economy. While at the meeting, the President delivered a statement on his forthcoming budget proposal, which he'll submit to March 16th, as you just heard the Director mention. The President's budget will first and foremost keep Americans safe. That means investing in both our nation's physical and financial security. We will rebuild the nation's military. An increase in defense spending, including increased funding for our veterans and our border, will be matched by equal reductions in non-defense programs. The savings in our budget will come from looking at outdated and duplicative programs. The reductions spending will be sensible and rational, but they will also be tough. With our nation's debt spiraling out of control, we simply must take a look at the way we're spending taxpayers' dollars. Families across the country are being forced to make difficult choices because for too long the federal government has not treated their money with the respect they deserve. The national debt exploded under the last administration from $10.6 billion on January 20th, 2009 to $19.9 trillion the day before, sorry, those are both trillions, the day before the President Trump's inaugural. Every child born in America this year will inherit an average of over $60,000 in debt, and that frankly is too much. Our budget will restore respect for taxpayers' dollars while funding all of the necessary programs to keep our country safe and prospering. This meeting with the governors was a continuation of a weekend of engagement and discussion between the governors and the administration. The President and the First Lady welcomed the governors last night to the White House for the annual Governor's Ball, and yesterday the Vice President had a very productive meeting with several governors. The administration is proud to be working with the governors on rebuilding our nation's infrastructure, reforming our healthcare system, and putting Americans back to work. I know that Obamacare in particular was put into place without a lot of input from governors. We're committed to consulting and including them on this and so many other subjects as we solve the nation's biggest issues together. Later this morning, the President had a listening session with some of our country's leading healthcare insurance companies. Interestingly, on yesterday's ABC This Week, Minority Leader Pelosi actually laid out a great outline of how to judge Obamacare's success based on what it was supposed to achieve. She said, quote, it had three goals. One, to lower the cost, the other, to expand benefits, and the third, to improve and increase access. So let's go through her criteria. Lowering costs. Well, this year, all four tiers of Obamacare insurance plans are facing double-digit increases in average premiums. Just to take a look at one set of premiums, for standard silver plans in the states, 63% increase in Tennessee, 69% increase in Oklahoma, and a staggering 116% increase in Arizona. On expanding benefits, in reality, the new law's mandates have led to mass cancellations of coverage, soaring out-of-pocket costs, and declining enrollment figures. Millions are choosing to pay a tax over buying the government-mandated insurance. Increased access. With insurance fleeing the marketplace, Americans are facing a dwindling number of insurance choices, with 17% of Americans left with only one insurer option available in their exchange. Insurers will be indispensable partners in the transition period out of Obamacare into the Patients First plan the President will be working with Congress to put in its place. The President's plan will encourage innovation, modernize our healthcare system, and provide immediate relief and ensure access to quality, truly affordable care. This afternoon, the President had lunch with Vice President Pence and Ambassador Haley. Afterwards, he's having a meeting with Speaker Ryan and Majority Leader McConnell. And then following that, he's going to be meeting with Secretary of State Tillerson. The Secretary is coming off a very successful trip to Mexico that he was joined by Secretary of Homeland Security Kelly. I'm sure the President's looking forward to discussing that trip with the Secretary. Also this afternoon, the Vice President will be speaking to an extraordinary group of 60 presidents of historically black colleges and universities. There will be a pool spray at the top of the event, and the Vice President's office will release his remarks and photos following the event. We can also expect a meeting with the President with them as well. This evening, the President will have dinner with regional press affiliates that are going to be in town for the joint session of Congress. While it's tradition for representatives from the networks to meet with the President before his joint address, this is the first time, to my knowledge at least, that the opportunity has been expanded to include representation from 18 regional outlets from around the country. Tomorrow, the President will also have the traditional lunch with the network anchors. Beyond the so-called Big Five networks, we've also opened it up and invited outlets including Telemundo, Univision, CBN, EWTN, OANN, PBS, C-SPAN, and TV One. Tonight, the President looks forward to seeing his nominee for the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, confirmed by the Senate. Secretary-designate Ross has been an important champion for U.S. struggling industries in the private sectors, and pending his confirmation this evening, he will now do in the same post on behalf of the American people what he has done in private sector. Assuming everything goes according to the plan in the Senate tonight, we expect to have his swearing in tomorrow here at the White House. Also tomorrow, the President will deliver his first address to both houses of Congress. In his speech, the President will lay out an optimistic vision for the country, crossing traditional lines of party, race, and socioeconomic status. As I said before, the theme will be the renewal of the American spirit. He will invite Americans of all backgrounds to come together in the service of a stronger and brighter future for our nation. In addition to laying out the concrete steps the President has already taken to make the American dream possible for all of our people, he will talk about the bold agenda he wants to work with Congress. This includes tax and regulatory reform to provide relief to hardworking Americans and their businesses, making the workplace better for working parents, ensuring the families who have suffered under Obamacare's skyrocketing rates see it replaced with a patient-centered alternative, making sure every child in America has access to a good education, a rebuilding of our military, and fulfilling of our commitments to veterans to whom we obviously owe a great deal of gratitude. You can expect a speech grounded firmly in solving real problems for every American. How can we make sure that every American who needs a better job get one? How can we get kids who are trapped in failing schools into better ones? How we can keep gangs and drug violence out of our neighborhoods and communities? The President will address the Americans who have been waiting for help from their leaders for too long and let them know that help is finally on the way. With respect to the speech, we will be having a background briefing sometime this evening here in the briefing room. We will provide additional details later in the afternoon. As you might already know, the Department of Defense presented its preliminary plan to the White House today to defeat ISIS. This plan has been delivered by Secretary Mattis, and who is currently briefing the principals on the option presented with today and seeking their input and feedback. Finally, I wanted to note the President continues to be deeply disappointed and concerned by the reports of further vandalism at Jewish cemeteries. The cowardly destruction in Philadelphia this weekend comes on top of similar accounts from Missouri and threats made to Jewish community centers around the country. The President continues to condemn these and any other form of anti-Semitic and hateful acts in the strongest terms. From our country's founding, we've been dedicated to protecting the freedom of our citizens' rights to worship. No one in America should feel afraid to follow the religion of their choosing freely and openly. The President is dedicated to preserving this originating principle of our nation. And while we're at it, I don't want to get ahead of the law enforcement, but I was asked the other day about the story in Kansas, the shooting in Kansas. And while the story is evolving, early reports out of Kansas are equally disturbing. So with that, I'd be glad to take your questions. John.
Sean, there's a report this morning that you reached out directly to the CIA Director Pompeo. Did you directly contact Director Pompeo and ask him to knock down the New York Times story on the Russia connection?
Thanks, John. Let me, kind of, if I may, walk through the entire timeline. I think it's important. As I mentioned, I think a week ago, the New York Times published a story about what they called contacts between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. The FBI deputy director was at a meeting here at the White House that morning. After the meeting concluded, he asked Chief of Staff to stand back a second. He wanted to tell him that the report in the New York Times was, quote, BS. for viewers at home, I think you can pretty much figure what that means, but I'll leave it at that. At that time, the Chief of Staff said, "Thank you for sharing that with me. Can we let other people know that the story is not accurate?" Throughout the day, they went back and forth to see what they thought was appropriate. Finally came to the conclusion that they did not want to get in the process of knocking down every story that they had issues with. We then were informed that other people had come to the same conclusions, including that time Chairman Devin Nunes had told us, "Hey, I've been knocking this down, telling reporters." We shared a number with him of a reporter that had contacted us. And again, when the reporters contacted us and we said, "No, that's not, to the best of our knowledge, it's not true," they were asking us, "Can you point to anybody else that can substantiate this?" And I think we did a good job of saying, "Sure, we will share with reporters other people who have come to the same conclusion." So I won't go into the specifics. I will say that I think we did our job very effectively by making sure that reporters who had questions about the accuracy and the claims made in the New York Times, that we were pointing them to subject matter experts who understood whether or not that story was accurate or not. And I think, just to continue to be very, very clear on this, it was about the accuracy of the reporting and the claims that were made in there. Plain and simple, about whether or not a story that appeared in the New York Times was accurate. And individual after individual continued to say that they, as far as they knew, they weren't. I think most of you probably saw Chairman Nunes' comments this morning. He was very clear, number one, that he reached out to us to say, "I've been telling people, reporters, that these allegations and descriptions in the New York Times are not accurate." And then we shared that information with him, but he came to us to share that he equally had that issue brought up to him. He was briefed and saw, quote, "no evidence that the story was accurate." So the answer is, we have continued to give reporters information and sources that went to the accuracy or lack thereof of a report that was in a newspaper. And I think, I think Chairman Nunes also equally said it's interesting how we literally were engaging with the press, saying, if you have a question about the sourcing on this, obviously when brought to our attention, we said it's not accurate as far as we know. But then most of you and your colleagues who had inquired would say, well, that's great, I'm sure you're saying this, but who else can corroborate this? So our job was to continue to, when informed, share sources who had equally come to the same conclusion that the Times story was not accurate.
You don't think there's something strange about, or there's something odd about the White House press secretary getting the CIA director on the phone to knock down a story about an investigation?
No, but see, respectfully, you're using words like knock down. There was a story in a newspaper. Hold on. No. There was reporters coming to us saying there is a story out there. What's your take on it? And our answer was, we don't believe it's accurate. We don't believe it's false. But obviously, that's our take on it. And reporters were saying to us, well, is there anybody that you can point to substantiate this claim? Now, remember, this all started with the FBI coming to us, bringing it to our attention, saying that the story in the Times was not accurate. In fact, it was BS. And all we did was simply say, that's great. Could you tell other reporters the same thing you're telling us? And I would think that other reporters, yourself included, would think that that would be a helpful thing to get the story straight. All we sought to do was to actually get an accurate report out. And again, I think Chairman Nunes this morning, over and over and over and over again, made it very clear that no evidence that has been brought to his attention suggests that that reporting was accurate. So, respectfully, I think it's interesting that I'm being asked what's appropriate when what we're doing is actually urging reporters to engage with subject matter experts who can corroborate whether or not something's accurate or not.
Should there be a special prosecutor? Darrell Ice has called for a special prosecutor to look into this.
Right, and I guess my question would be, a special prosecutor for what?
Look into the whole Russia connection.
And here's my right, and I guess
he
my
was part of the campaign. Sessions was part of the campaign.
I understand, but here's my question, Jonathan. We have now for 6 months heard story after story come out about unnamed sources say the same thing over and over again, and nothing's come of it. Right? We've heard the same people, the same anecdotes, and we've heard reports over and over again. And as Chairman Nunes very, very clear today, he has seen nothing that corroborates that. So at what point you've got to ask yourself, what are you investigating.
Well, Russian interference, I mean, beyond
no,
the
and
context.
I think that both the House and the Senate have looked at it. You know as well as I do that the intelligence community has looked at it as well. There's a big difference. I think that Russia's involvement and activity has been investigated up and down. So the question becomes at some point, if there's nothing to further investigate, what are you asking people to investigate? I mean, Chairman Nunes spoke very clearly today when asked over and over and over again about all of this and said that he has seen nothing that leads him to believe that there's there. The president has spoken forcefully time and time again that he has no interest in Russia. He hasn't talked to people in Russia in years. And yet you keep asking, and I say you collectively, to try to find something that seemingly at least the reporting that I'm seeing in different organizations suggests that there's nothing new that's being reported. It's the same stuff over and over again that we've heard for literally 6 months. And so the question becomes at some point, what do you need to further investigate if there is nothing that has come out?
Well, can you now categorically deny there were no contacts between the Russians
Oh,
and
I
anybody
can't
on the
deny. I
campaign?
can't. I guess my question is,
That's
I'm not right.
That's what the investigation would look at.
Right, and I guess my point is that you've had the intelligence community look at Russia's involvement in the election. You've had the House and the Senate both do the same. And so what I'm trying to ascertain is at what point, how many people have to say that there's nothing there before you realize there's nothing there? I can't say unequivocally. All I'm saying is the people who've done the investigating about Russia overall and its activities in the United States, specifically now with respect to our election, haven't provided anything that lead me to believe or should leave you to believe. And I continue to see reports coming from different media sources that are saying, when they checked in with law enforcement or intelligence community sources, there's nothing more than has been previously reported over and over again. So at some point, you do have to ask yourself, what are you actually looking for? How many times do you have to come to the same conclusion before you take the answer? And that's what Mara?
Sean,
Just to be clear, just to follow up on that,
Yeah.
did you personally reach out to Pompeo?
I'm not going to
What-
discuss what we did internally. I'm just going to say that when we shared, we did our job about making sure that when reporters had questions, we let them know what subject matter experts were available to discuss the accuracy of a newspaper story. Mara.
Yeah, I'm sure people will come back to this, but I actually have a budget question, which is, during the campaign, the president said he was not going to touch Medicare, Social Security. His Treasury Secretary repeated that. It sounded like the OMB director was leaving that as an open question to
No, no, no.
BD. I'm just wondering, what's the state of the promise? That
Right.
he won't touch it for current retirees,
No,
anybody
I
paying
think
in?
what the
Yeah.
OMB director made clear is how it works. The budget is dealing with the top line discretionary numbers. Policy decisions are not part of the budget. That was what he was being asked and what he. So I just want to be clear in terms of what he was. And
The
again, I
state
think
of the promise.
right,
In
and
other
I think the
words,
state of
what
the
is the
promise,
promise? Yeah.
is clear. And I think, as you point out, he has made the promise. He stands by the promise. The Treasury
What is the
Secretary.
promise? Current retirees, people near retirement, anybody paying into
I
these
will follow
programs?
up specifically on that before I get, but I think the president has made very clear that that's not his intent to do. He wants to focus on the discretionary side. That entitlement reform is not that with respect to those programs that he mentioned. He stands by his word.
Sean, the
Fred
president
Lucas. Fred.
I wanted to ask a couple issues. An executive order on religious freedom had previously been in the works. Will that still come? And if it does, will it extend beyond religious freedom? And,
Well, I'm sorry, Fred. What?
I'm sorry. Will it extend beyond the Johnson Amendment?
I think we've discussed executive orders in the past, and for the most part, we're not going to get into discussing what may or may not come until we're ready to announce it. So I'm sure as we move forward, we'll have some. Olivier.
Thanks, Sean. I'm sorry. I just one more.
Okay.
The issue of tax reform. And will there be, how committed is the administration to a border-adjusted tax? And is there any concern that there won't be enough conservative support for that it could block any meaningful tax reform long term?
Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics of tax reform today. The president has made clear that we'll have an outline of a plan very soon. But what I will say is that I think he has talked about the concerns that he has with current regulatory and tax policy that benefit people from moving out of the country and shipping products back in while shedding American workers. He will continue to fight for policies that promote manufacturing and job creation in the United States and supports American workers. So I don't want to get ahead of the exact nature of the policy. He has been seeking a lot of input. As I mentioned earlier, he's going to talk today with Speaker Ryan and Senator McConnell. I know that both the joint session, the status of repeal and replace, and I'm sure some discussion of tax reform will probably come up. But there's a lot. We're continuing to move forward and work with them. Olivier.
Thanks. A couple on the ISIS strategy.
Yeah.
Can you just get to the timetable from now that you've received it, what happens? And there's a report that you're asking for $30 billion in emergency defense spending on top of the 54 in the budget. Is that true? Does that cover the new ISIS strategy? Can you explain the relationship between the two?
Thank you. Right now, literally, that principals meeting that I mentioned at the beginning is happening as we speak. So Secretary Mattis was coming over to brief the principals as far as the ISIS plan. And again, part of it was to make sure that he fully discusses the recommendations that he's making and seek the input and feedback of the other principals downstairs. That can help guide where we go from here, how we go. With respect to the funding, I think Director Mulvaney noted that there'll be a supplemental at some point. Right now, the focus is on the budget, and then we'll go from there. John Gizzi.
Thank you, Sean. Two brief questions. First, I read your statement at the Thursday briefing to Governor Malloy of Connecticut during the NGA meeting, and he responded, and I quote, Sean didn't read a thing that I said. He said that in Connecticut, they are already working to get criminals who are in the country illegally out. His objection was to going into warming centers or schools where officials might frighten children. Your response to the governor on that?
Well, again, I was asked specifically what the comments were with respect to sanctuary cities, and again, I would reiterate, with all due respect to the governor, I'm not here to pick a fight with the governor. I enjoyed my time going to school in the state of Connecticut, but I have a kind affection of the Nutmeg State. But the reality is, I think that there's a difference. Whether or not what he wants to do with state funds, maybe, I without knowing the exact nature of how he's funding, what he's funding, it's difficult. The question I was asked at the time was on how we would be handling it. And I think the answer, whether it's Connecticut or California, is that the president's executive order and the president's commitment is to make sure that tax dollars are not used to support programs that are helping people who are not in the country legally and who are not citizens entitled to them.
Blake, one more question,
okay.
Sean.
Starting early.
For 58 years, when presidents have gone to Rome, they've always met the Pope, going back to when President Eisenhower met Pope John the 23rd. Now, 1 year ago this week, candidate Trump had a disagreement with this Pope in an exchange of words. When he goes to Rome in May for his first European trip, will he meet with this Pope?
It's a great question. Obviously, I would be a huge fan of that. But I'm not going to. I don't think we're at that place in the planning process to make an announcement on any visits with the Pope. But Blake.
Sean, thank you. Two budget questions, if you don't mind. Mr. Mulvaney, I believe, just said that what the administration plans on putting forward doesn't add to the current deficit projection, which the CBO says is about $560 billion. But he didn't say that it would significantly drop from that either. So my first question is the administration comfortable putting something forward that might rack up deficits of potentially hundreds of billions of dollars?
Well, I think I'm trying to understand the question a little, if you can help me with this, because
he said it wasn't going to add to it.
Right.
So my question is, he didn't necessarily say it was going to cut from it either. If it doesn't cut from it, potentially it could be hundreds of billions in deficits, and I'm curious.
Right, no, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, he basically made it very clear it doesn't add to the projected baseline deficit, right? So that continues to be the goal, and I think as we continue to work through this process of passback, it can work both ways. We could identify further savings and reductions through working with the agencies and departments. But we're going to make sure that the top line number we maintain and as close to that as possible. And as we go through this, I mean, this is the beginning of the process, as the director noted. We send the number to the department of the agency, give them some ideas how we came up with this, and then they come back to us and either justify why the particular program or office or what have you needs to stay in existence, or why maybe not the reduction that is offered. But it's a back and forth process that will occur over the next few weeks. So to get ahead of it is the problem.
Let me ask you what Nancy Pelosi, to just get a quick reaction to Nancy Pelosi. She put out a statement and said the following, quote, 5 weeks into his administration, President Trump has not introduced a single jobs bill. Your reaction to that would be what?
He's created a lot of jobs. I think that's he's continuing to work with Congress on both repealing and replacing Obamacare, tax reform, and fundamentally, both of those two items alone, I think, can help spur a lot of economic growth. The meetings that we've had with the CEOs, the health insurers, there's so many things that are both job killing and that can be done to help promote a better regulatory and tax climate that lead to job creation. I think that's one of the biggest problems right now is that people in Washington aren't necessarily talking to job creators and saying, what is the impediment that you have to hiring more American workers? What is the impediment that you have to manufacturing more, to building here? The meetings and the actions that the president has taken on both regulatory and other matters have helped spur job and job creation. You've heard these companies come in over and over again, the automakers, the airlines, Sprint. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of people saying to the president, because of your agenda, because of your vision, we're willing to commit to hiring additional people, to manufacturing more. You know, that's how jobs are created. It's not through the government. And too often, it's the government regulations that stifle and prevent job creation. And I think the president, as a businessman, fully appreciates and understands how this works and what some of those impediments do to creating jobs and to growing the economy. And so I would just say that you haven't seen anything yet. It's going to continue to be the case. Trey.
Thanks, Sean. Is there concern in the administration that a large-scale military buildup will appear threatening to other countries around the world and lead to some sort of arms race with other countries?
No, I think when you look at the state of some of the infrastructure in our military, with the age of our ships or our planes, or some of the other hardware that exists, you recognize that we need to rebuild a lot of these things. The size of our Navy has gone down significantly, and there are new needs and new planning. And when you look at the commitment that you have to make, not just in 1 year, but in several years, for a lot of these programs, ships and tanks, even weapon systems, they don't get built in a month or a day. You have to make a commitment early on to make the investment because of the time that it takes to procure them, to build them, the research and development that goes into it. And so I would just suggest to you that this is the first step in making sure we make the commitment to a military that, especially through the sequester the last few years, has not gotten the funding it needs to get off life support. There are a lot of things that are being taken care of in the military where they're just continuing to, they're not putting the systems and the projects in place to allow the military to keep up with the times, and that's a problem, Major.
Sean, one investigation question, one budget question. As you may be aware, Bill Owens, the father of Ryan Owens, gave an interview with Miami Herald over the weekend, and he said, quote, "The government owes my son an investigation. On behalf of the President of the United States, is the President open to an investigation of the raid in Yemen?" And the father of Ryan Owens called that a stupid mission. Is there something that you'd like to communicate to him about that mission that might persuade him otherwise?
Yeah, thank you. That's multi-part, so let me kind of walk through it slowly. First of all, I can't possibly imagine what he's going through in terms of the loss of a son. I can tell him that on behalf of the president, his son died a hero, and the information that he was able to help obtain through that raid, as I've said before, was going to save American lives. It's going to protect our country more. So he made a sacrifice for this country. He was on his 12th deployment. And I know that his wife, when she spoke to the president, knows that he did this because he loved it. He cared about our nation. And the mission was successful in helping prevent a future attack or attacks on this nation. It obtained a lot of information that will help us keep safe. With respect to his request, it is standard operating procedure for the Department of Defense to undergo what they call a 15-6 review. That review, in this case, is three-pronged. Because there was a fatality and the loss of life, there's that. Because there were civilians involved, that's another. And then third is because there was hardware, a helicopter that was damaged. That is a separate. So, in fact, there will be 3 reviews done by the Department of Defense because of the nature of this. But again, I can't stress enough that on behalf of the President, on behalf of this nation, we express our condolences, extend our prayers to him during this time. And
As you said, that is standard procedure. Is there anything the president is particularly curious about with this mission, in that it was brought to him, he authorized it quickly? Does he believe in the main it was carried out well, and there's nothing that he's particularly curious about in the way either the helicopter was damaged, the fatality, the civilian casualties, of anything of the like?
Well, number one, I've walked through the timetable previously in terms of how long this had been planned for, dating well back into the previous administration. And as you know, their recommendation at the time was to wait for a moonless night. That night wasn't going to occur during President Obama's administration. And so when General Mattis got into the Department of Defense, he was briefed up on the status of the thing, made aware of when the next time was go. We went through the process to ensure that we continued to believe that the mission, the way it was going to be conducted, and the results of the mission would be worthy of action. The conclusion continued to be, as it was prior, that we should move forward. As I mentioned before, I think you can't ever say that when there's, most importantly, loss of life and people injured, that it's 100% successful. But I think when you look at what the stated goal of that mission was, it was an information and intelligence gathering mission, and it achieved that its objectives. So, again, I would express our thoughts and our prayers and our condolences to all of the people in Chief Owens, his family and his friends, his shipmates. But it's something that, as a SEAL and as someone who deployed 12 times, he knew that this was part of the job, and he knew what he was doing. And so we're very comfortable with how the mission was executed, and you know, we'll let the Department of Defense go through that review process and then see where that leads us. But I think to get ahead of the 3 separate reviews are being done by the Department of Defense would be probably a little irresponsible at this time.
Sean, on regulations.
Major gets 2 too.
Just real quick on the budget. As you are aware, to undo the defense sequester, you have to get 60 votes in the Senate because you have a separate domestic sequester number and defense. Are you confident with these numbers and with this kind of heavy discretionary spending cut proposed, you can get the 60 votes to change the law? Because without that change in law, the proposal is just that. It doesn't become operational.
I think that when it comes to our nation's security, specifically our nation's military, I don't think that it's a partisan issue. I think that senators from across the country, whether you're talking about Florida or what kind of, whether you've got an Army installation or a Navy base, you understand the state of repair that many of our planes, ships, and other hardware is in. And I think that there is a bipartisan commitment to give the military and its members the equipment and the tools it needs to succeed and protect this country. So I do feel confident. April?
Sean, I'm sorry. Sean, I have a couple of budgetary questions for you. One, at the press conference, President Trump talked about the fix for inner cities. What is the investment in this budget when it comes to a fix for inner cities?
It's a good try. I think the director was very clear that we're not, I mean, part of the process today was to start that pass-back process that he talked about, where we're going to the various departments, whether it's HUD or DOT, and giving them that top-line number and then hearing back. So I don't want to get into a specific number with you before we get too far down the process. I think that's a conversation that we're going to have with the agencies, and then we will have subsequently with Congress when they start drafting their resolution.
Okay, follow up on this, but I do have a question. But see, he talked about healthcare, he talked about education, and he talked about crime, and he continues to talk about Chicago and law enforcement. So you don't have any kind of budgetary numbers when it comes to, and healthcare is a piece it's one of the line items for this budget.
That's right. And I'm not saying that we don't have numbers. I'm saying that we're not giving them out. That's a big difference. I know, you're going to do a good job trying. But as the director noted on this, that they have come up with top-line numbers based on their going through each of these agencies' budget and saying, hey, there's a duplicative program here. In some cases, maybe they give them more, maybe they give them less. Part of it is to begin that conversation, that process, with the departments and agencies to figure out what those investments are. Maybe it's repurposing existing funds in a different way. So it's not necessarily a zero-sum game. There is a way that a department can reallocate money to a program that might end up benefiting because there's a duplicative or out-of-date program or office that savings could be applied to something. But I don't want to get ahead of the process right now, only to say that we are at the very beginning of it.
And then on HBCUs,
Yes.
The president is going to see the 80-plus presidents of HBCUs with the vice president
That's right.
today. Some of them are very concerned as to what this executive order looks like, and they are waiting to hear the commitment before they say, I'm all in.
Okay.
What is the commitment that this president is trying to make when it comes to HBCUs to ensure, I guess, their future or deal with funding for research projects, what have you, or moving it out of Department of Education into the purview of the White House? What is the commitment that he's going to give to them?
So, look, I don't generally speak about executive orders until they're finalized. I will just say that one of the things that I think there's a commitment from this White House to do is to look at the various resources throughout the federal government that support HBCUs. So, for example, the Department of Defense has ROTC and NROTC programs. Are they being properly, is that funding being properly executed and spent? There's programs within each of the departments, the Department of Education, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, that affect grants or programs or direct funding that go to HBCUs for various different things, whether it's construction projects or teaching programs or mentorship programs, whatever it is, they span throughout the entire government. And I think that what we are committed to doing is ensuring that that there is a high level understanding and commitment that goes straight to the president of how we harness those resources within the government and make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's one thing to have them, right, spread throughout the different departments. It's another thing to make sure that there's a direct pipeline to the President of the United States, that those programs are being executed in a way that's benefiting the future of HBCUs and the various projects and teaching that goes on there.
So what are you saying? There's going to be a piece that is going to basically go throughout all the agencies to make sure that there is some kind of commitment to HBCUs in contract, like, let's say, engineering for some schools or in research for other schools?
I would say this. I think I'm going to stick to waiting until we announce it to get out a lot more. I anticipate it very soon. How's that? I want to give myself a little wiggle room. Phil Rucker.
Yeah, Sean, thanks. Budget-related question, but on infrastructure.
Yeah.
The president has repeatedly, including today again, called for a major infrastructure plan to the tune of $1 trillion, roads, bridges, tunnels, you name it. Can you explain where that money is going to come from, how it fits into the budget that's under review right now, and what the timeline for that project would be?
So I think that would be part of a longer-term discussion that we're having with Congress. As you know, the president got in office 30-some-odd days ago. The idea of getting a budget, as you know, it's commonly referred to as a skinny budget, is to get the government continue to be funding, and it'll be something that we'll work with Congress. I understand your point. The president continues to talk about the status.
Priority for him.
It is, absolutely. But I think that we've got to make sure that it's done right, and that we work with Congress. I think, as you correctly mentioned, there's obviously a funding mechanism to this, and we've already talked about things like comprehensive tax reform that could add to that discussion. And so I understand what you're asking in terms of how this will be funded and when it will be coming and the pay-fors. But we're working with Congress to have that discussion. I think that comes probably outside of the budget discussion.
And so how does he square that with the need to tighten the belt, which he also talked about today?
Because
we've been spending too much as a
right,
government.
but I
we
think
need to
there's,
cut our
but
spending.
in the same manner that we're presenting the budget. So we're talking about adding $54 million, or $54 trillion rather, to $1 billion to, thank you. Appreciate the help here. But we're looking to add that to defense, and so what it means is that we have to look through other programs to find reductions in savings. I think that same kind of discussion would happen with respect to infrastructure, not necessarily the savings piece, but the funding piece. That there's several ways, and I know that there's a lot of discussion, private-public partnerships that he has started to have a discussion with in terms of the funding mechanism. And so all I'm trying to get at is that there are various ways to do this funding without just relying on the American taxpayer in terms of additional taxes. There are spending reductions, there are other funding mechanisms, and I think in due course we will get around to that discussion.
And just related to that, he mentioned in his remarks about infrastructure today
Yeah.
that as he drives through the Queens Midtown Tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel, he worries about ceiling tiles falling. Is there a specific incident he was talking about where people have been injured, or is that just a fear of his?
I don't know. I'll ask, but I'm sure Secret Service will take care of the alleviating the medium concerns. Hold on, Alexis.
Sean, I have two questions. First one on healthcare. Because the OMB director was signaling that the complete budget would be maybe ready early May, and the president today described how complicated he's discovered that the healthcare repeal and replace has become. Can you describe when it is that the president would present his framework for an overhaul of healthcare? Is it going to be included in the budget so we would see it before May?
I don't think you're going to see it in the budget. No, that's not the appropriate vehicle for it. I think I've mentioned it before. I think you would drive, or at least the leading option, before I get locked into something, is to add Obamacare to the FY17 budget process and put it through reconciliation. So that would happen outside of the current budget structure. But I think he has also been very clear that he wants this outlined within a matter of weeks, and that we continue to have these discussions with House and Senate leadership, with Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce, and then similar on Senate Finance on the Senate side. So when he talks to Speaker Ryan and Leader McConnell today, I'm sure that conversation will continue. Alexa,
Just to follow up on healthcare, because not every ingredient in the Affordable Care Act can be handled in reconciliation.
Right.
That's why I was asking about the elements of it that would be in
right.
the budget. So we will see some of those?
well, there's several pieces of Obamacare. Some can be done by executive order. Some get done with 50 votes. Some have to be done specifically in reconciliation. I think kind of to Major's point on a previous question, that there are certain things that have to be done in certain ways legislatively, and to create a comprehensive and holistic approach to both repealing it and replacing it. And we're aware of that. We're working with the House and the Senate to make that happen.
My second topic.
Of course.
All right. The immigration executive order,
Right.
the travel ban. Is the president going to address the American people and Congress in his speech tomorrow night and specifically describe and defend the immigration ban? And when will we see the revised executive order?
So we're not going to, I would not anticipate the speech being a defense of legislation and executive orders. I don't think many previous presidents have gotten through and used that as a legislative walkthrough. But you will hear about his commitment to immigration and his desire for border security and what it means, not just about keeping the nation safe, but what impact it's having on the economy. So you will hear a lot about immigration tomorrow night, and he will talk about why it matters and the goal that we have and why we should come together on areas like this. Kate, hold on, Caitlin.
Where's the next order?
Oh, I'm sorry. The next order, I think we should have it out probably middle of this week, looking towards the middle of the week, and we'll have further updates as we get through the schedule. I think obviously our priority right now today was to really get the budget process kicked off and then continue to prepare for the joint session. Caitlin, you will in a second. Hold on,
An
we get to.
internal report in 2015 identified $125 billion in wasteful Pentagon spending. So how can you justify adding $54 billion to the defense budget? Is that going to go to hiring soldiers or bureaucrats or contractors? And is the president concerned with wasteful spending at the DoD?
Of course he's concerned. He's concerned with wasteful spending throughout the government. But I think there's also a big difference between rooting out waste and fraud in various programs and offices and understanding that when you're talking about adding to the fleet or increasing airplane costs, that can't be driven just through those. And the commitment that you have to make to purchase some of those very needed upgrades to our infrastructure and to our arsenal and to planes and ships doesn't just come through that. Because even if you could start to really identify it, you wouldn't be able to make the financial commitment that needs to be done to rebuild some of the ships and planes in particular that need a substantial investment on the front end. John.
If I could just follow on Alexa's question. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has just denied your request to suspend proceedings in regard to the initial executive order. That order came out just within the last few minutes. So do you plan to continue defending your first executive order in court? And what's the purpose of doing that as opposed to simply rescinding it and then rendering that case moot?
Well, I haven't been able to read my phone while this has happened, so I know. I thank you. I appreciate it. So, with all due respect, I would ask that I be able to get back to you tomorrow on that after we consult with the counsel's office and go through the briefing and the reading of what the court has said. But give me a little time. Let me get off the podium.
I mean, the rescinding it question still stands.
I understand that, and I think that the president has made a commitment right now to continue to defend what we did. And hold on, because this is the strategy that he believes that we had the authority vested in U.S. code. I talked about this extensively in the past, and I think that if you allow me, once we get done with the briefing, I will follow up with the counsel's office to understand.
The point that some of us are trying to understand is if you have a new executive order that you believe addresses the concerns of the many courts who have weighed in on this, why continue to defend an executive order?
Because I think he's right. I mean, because we were right the first time. And I think that, but I think that it's not a question of proving a point. It's that the manner in which it was done in the first place was what we believe and continue to believe was the right way to address this problem. And while the second executive order attempts to address the court's concerns that they made, the goal is obviously to maintain the way that we did it the first time, because we believe that the law is very clear about giving the president the authority that he needs to protect the country. So just dropping that, it was not necessarily the most prudent thing. And I think part of it is for us to recoup right now, figure out what the court has said, and then reassess the strategy. But I don't want to get ahead, as you point out. You're reading it to me now. I would like the opportunity to maybe go read it and actually have a lawyer read it, since that won't do very much. Hold on, go ahead.
Thank you. On anti-Semitism, that was a good, strong statement. Is there anything the federal government can do to protect Jewish institutions? Do you have any leads of who's doing this? And also on sequester, when can sequester be lifted?
When can it be lifted? I think we've got to go through the process to lift the sequester. And so we'll deal with that. With respect to some of the activity that we've seen at Jewish cemeteries in particular, look, I think we have to work with law enforcement at a local and state level. I'll leave it to the Department of Justice to comment further on what additional steps can be made. But I think, as been pointed out multiple times, I think one of the things that we can do is speak from this podium in particular and other places to make sure that every American understands what our values are, and that kind of behavior and activity is wrong and won't be tolerated, and the highest levels of government denounce it. So I think it starts at that, and then I think there's a law enforcement component that I would, ask you to touch base with DOJ.
Thank you on the budget.
Yeah.
I understand this is a blueprint. I understand the president has previously said he doesn't want to touch entitlements. But why does he think it's the right move to break with years of Republican orthodoxy, House Speaker Paul Ryan, who have said that any sensible long-term budget needs to include entitlement reform?
Well, I think the president understands the commitment that was made to seniors in particular, and that it's a sacred bond and a trust. And I think, look, Mara asked this earlier. I think, let me get back to you on the specifics, but I think he made a commitment to the American people. And one of the things that I think the president continues to get high marks on is that regardless of whether you voted for him or not, you agree with his policy, he's a man of his word. And he has followed up on the promises that he made to the American people. And I think that's important. Now, again, I think that we will continue to work with Congress. But the president understands that we have commitments that we've made on the entitlement side, in particular, and especially on the senior side with respect to Social Security, that need to be maintained. And so he's going to keep his word to the American people.
But if you talk to some economic analysts, they say Social Security, Medicare won't be there in a number of years if we don't address.
And I think that, and so for right now, I think the budget that we're laying out deals on the discretionary side. I think you've heard the president's priorities and commitment, especially when it comes to protecting this country. And if we have anything further, I'll let you know. Go ahead.
Sean, one more. Is there an internal leak inquiry right now?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you very much, Sean. I have two questions on U.S.-China relationship, if I may.
You may.
Thank you.
Everyone else gets to.
First of all, since President Trump took office, China sent its very first senior official, State Councilor Yang Jiechi, to visit Washington, D.C. today. whether there will be a meeting in the White House, and what's the White House's expectation of his visit.
So the state counselor, and for those of you not schooled in the Chinese government, is basically the equivalent of our NSC director, correct?
Yes.
So the ambassador and the state counselor came today. They had a meeting with H.R. McMaster, Jared Kushner, and I think some others sat in on the meeting. They had a delegation of 6 people here. After the meeting ended, I believe the state counselor was taken and had an opportunity to say hi to the president before he left. This is an opportunity to begin that conversation and talk to them on shared interests of national security. I'm sorry, hold on, he gets one more. Everybody else did. Hold on. Let me everybody else got 2.
Yes, just this morning, President Trump mentioned about his pick for his pick for ambassador to China,
yes.
Governor Branstad. Governor Branstad apparently has a really positive view on China.
Yeah.
So, how confident the president is on the governor's confirmation to get all the support in the Senate?
Oh, I think he'll receive tremendous support, bipartisan support. Governor Branstad is a true. He has huge ties on both sides. I think he's one of the longest serving governors ever, definitely in Iowa. And I think that he has tremendous respect from both sides of the aisle, not just for how he's handled himself as a governor in Iowa, but his deep understanding and ties to China and to China's economy and the Chinese officials. And I think he's going to do a phenomenal job representing our nation. He starts with a deep understanding of the Chinese economy, the Chinese government, and that is going to really serve our nation well. Mara?
I just have a follow-up on China. Thank you, because I know I got one before. I
You did.
appreciate that. A lot of people voted for Donald Trump because they agreed with him that the U.S. was getting ripped off by China. And after the election, he made the call to Taiwan, which he was praised for. Then he told Fox News, he said, I don't know why we have to be bound by a one China policy unless we make a deal with China having to do with other things, including trade. Then he reaffirmed the one China policy. So what did he get in return from China for doing that?
Well, he had a conversation with President Xi. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but at the President Xi's request, and after a discussion, the President reaffirmed the one China policy. The President is not one to discuss his negotiating tactics.
But did he get
so
something?
I'm
Can
not
he
gonna,
assure the American
I
people he
will
got
just-
something?
The President always gets something. Ryan?
What was it?
2 quick follow-ups. First of all, I noticed earlier today there were a lot of Republican governors out here, but not very many Democratic governors. Is this administration actively attempting to reach out to the other side of the aisle for compromise?
I think if you saw the remarks during the pool opportunity, the president talked about some of the conversations he had with Governor McAuliffe from Virginia in particular, but they were here last night. They had dinner with their wives and husbands. It was an opportunity to really talk to the cabinet and get to know each other and talk about priorities. I will say that it's interesting. I mentioned Obamacare when one of the things that was brought up by the governors, and I got to be honest, I wasn't picking which governors and thinking of party, but it came up over and over again that they actually, several of them commented on how appreciative they have been in terms of seeking their input on not just healthcare, but infrastructure and Medicaid in particular, and health and other areas that fall into their wheelhouse. So I think, just so we're clear, the dialogue that exists between this administration and this president and governors, I think, is a very refreshing move forward.
My quick follow-up. I want to clarify a little bit of something that happened Thursday and Friday about the public enemy statement. Are you saying that all of the press is the public enemy, people who didn't vote for the president, just the people in this room, or is it just Bill Maher and maybe Warren Beatty? Can you clarify what we're talking about?
I think the president made clear in his tweet that he was referring to the fake news and people who ascribe to pushing fake stories is where his target was.
Thanks a lot. As you know, more than 60 Democrats either boycotted or skipped the president's inauguration. What kind of reception do you think the president will get tomorrow evening from Democrats in the House and the Senate when he gives his joint address?
Well, I hope a very robust and applause-filled reception. The speech, as I mentioned, breaks down a lot of barriers that have traditionally been political barriers in terms of areas where I think we should find agreement, that reaffirm the president's desire to unite the country and unite our parties in areas of shared common ground. And I think the things that he's talking about, increasing the support to our military, our veterans, helping children get an education, those are things that hopefully we can all come together and think are shared American values regardless of party. I hope that we see a tremendous amount of support for the president and his policies and his vision tomorrow night. He recognizes the problems that our nation faces, but he also charts a vision forward. And I think it's one that if people are honest, that they will agree that it really isn't a political agenda as much as an agenda for this country, and one to move us forward. So, I think that we'll have to wait and see, but I can tell you that I think it'll be a positive move forward. Zeke?
Thanks, Sean. A couple follows to Olivier's question earlier about the ISIS review. It's day 30. The memorandum the president signed 30 days ago said that he was supposed to be briefed. Can you give us some more time, a timeline on when specifically President Trump will be involved? I know you mentioned there's a principals meeting earlier today. What the timeline of the review is, and then separately, you mentioned that Secretary Mattis was the one who's been presenting it to the principals committee. The memorandum included things other than just the military. It included public diplomacy, efforts to cut off financial ties to ISIS.
Right.
What were the other cabinet secretaries involved? What got us here, and where do we go from here?
Thank you. Let me, if I may, get briefed on who and what occurred in the principals meeting to the extent that it's available, and I'd be glad to get back to you tomorrow on that. I just don't have that information available. Gabby.
Thanks, Sean. Palm Beach County has said that it's costing $60,000 a day in overtime pay every time the president comes to visit West Palm Beach. He's slated to go there again this weekend, according to some reports. Is the president taking any steps to ensure that taxpayers aren't saddled with tremendous costs of his travel habits, considering he was so critical of his predecessor on that matter?
Well, Gabby, the security for the president and the first family is set by the Secret Service. As you know, they determine the security measures that need to be taken to protect the president, frankly, any president. So I'm going to leave it up to the Secret Service to decide what security measures and steps are taken to protect the president. And as you know, I mean, this it transcends administrations. Wherever the president goes, they need to make sure that the president and the first family is safe. It's something that I think we rely on the Secret Service to make those determinations. They continue to do a phenomenal job making sure that the first family and the president and the vice president are protected, and we have full confidence in the decisions that they make. So thank you guys very much. We'll have a briefing tomorrow, later today, on the state. I was that. I would look in the 6 o'clock hour. So yes, here. I get to see you here again. I would plan on around 6 o'clock. We'll have further guidance, and I don't anticipate it being long. I think we're just going to walk through off camera. We'll walk through the themes of the speech, take any questions, and then try to get some additional information, depending on where the president is in his read through.
No briefing tomorrow, right?
No briefing tomorrow. Okay. If you don't want one, you don't have to have one.
Well, you said you'd get back to us on a couple of issues tomorrow.
I know. Well, I didn't. It's April that brought up no briefing.
No,
you guys want to vote?
No, but tradition is there's no.
I know. We will do something for you. I promise. We will make sure we get back.
Is it going to be a gaggle like last Friday?
No. We will get back to you. I'm sure you'll see my face here tomorrow. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us for the presser. President Donald Trump is... I'm going to put up President Trump in just a few seconds. It will come up on your screen. Please don't go anywhere. And President Trump speaking to governors this morning. So make sure that you stay here with us. And I'll put it up on the screen in just a few seconds. So just give me 1 second.
Reince Priebus, and good morning to Thank you so much, Reince Priebus, and good morning to all, to Chairman McAuliffe, to Vice Chairman Sandoval, America's governors, our cabinet officials. It is an honor to be with you today, and an honor to have the privilege to welcome you to the White House. You know, it's humbling for me to think that just a year ago I was seated with one of you. I was sitting among you, but thanks to the confidence of our new president and his historic victory last November, I now have the privilege to serve in a new capacity. And it is the greatest honor of my life to be Vice President to the 45th President of the United States of America. But let me speak as a former governor for just a moment. As a former governor, I first and foremost, on behalf of the President, the First Family, and my family, I just want to thank you for your service and the service of your family. I know I speak for the President and the First Lady when I say I hope that last night was a small token of the appreciation that the President and our administration feels for the service that you and your family render on behalf of the people of your states. And let me also say, I want to thank you for joining us today. It has been a weekend of vigorous discussions beginning with last Friday, and I know the President's looking very much forward to the discussion that will take place here at the White House this morning. You know, when I was a governor, I just wanted a president who would listen to me, right? A president who would work with me, who would respect the important constitutional responsibilities and role that not only the state played, but that I played as a governor. And this morning, let me assure you, you have that in President Donald Trump. The President recognizes that America's governors have a unique responsibility and a unique perspective that will be an important part of the national debate now and going forward. From the President's viewpoint, you are the CEOs of your state. And the CEO who has become President of the United States understands that, and he has directed our entire administration to work with you in crafting solutions that will improve the lives, the prosperity, the security, and the well-being of the people that we all serve. And rest assured, today is an annual meeting, but it is just a beginning of what we anticipate will be an ongoing dialogue. And I know the President and I and this administration look forward to partnering with you as we make America great again. Under President Trump's leadership, I truly do believe that this is a new day for state and federal collaboration for the betterment of the American people. We look forward to working with you on a range of issues. We'll talk about today, I expect, from healthcare to transportation to public safety to education, and most importantly, for jobs. I expect we'll have our differences, but at the end of the day, we'll never forget in this administration what you never forget, and that is that we, all of us, each of us, have the awesome privilege of serving the great people of the United States of America together, and we'll stay focused on them. Now, I believe this administration will be the best friend America's governors have ever had, because we have a president who recognizes that when your states succeed, America succeeds. So now it's my great privilege to introduce to you my friend, our host, a man I've come to know. I like to say he is a distinctly American leader. Broad shoulders, clear vision, a big heart. He loves his family and he loves this country with an unshakable faith in the American people. So ladies and gentlemen, governors, members of the cabinet, the President of the United States.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Wow. That is pretty good, I'll tell you. Coming from governors, I can't even believe it. That's so impressive, and I very much appreciate you being, and thank you to Vice President Pence. He has been so wonderful to work with. He's a real talent, a real guy, and he is central casting. Do we agree? Central casting. He's been great. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the White House. The First Lady and I were very, very happy last night to host you. We saw some real talent, military talent, musicians who were fantastic, and everybody enjoyed it. I'm very proud to have so many former governors in my cabinet. Vice President Pence, as you know, big governor from a very great state, a state I like very much, Indiana. Nikki Haley at the UN. Is Nikki here someplace? Think so, yes. We have Thank you. Wow. That is pretty good, I'll tell you. Coming from governors, I can't even believe it. That's so impressive, and I very much appreciate you being, and thank you to Vice President Pence. He has been so wonderful to work with. He's a real talent, a real guy, and he is central casting. Do we agree? Central casting. He's been great. Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the White House. The First Lady and I were very, very happy last night to host you. We saw some real talent, military talent, musicians who were fantastic, and everybody enjoyed it. I'm very proud to have so many former governors in my cabinet. Vice President Pence, as you know, big governor from a very great state, a state I like very much, Indiana. Nikki Haley at the UN. Is Nikki here someplace? Think so, yes. We have Rick Perry is going before. We're trying to get people approved. We can't get him out. But Rick is going to do a fantastic job. Sonny Perdue will be joining the cabinet very soon. Terry Branstad will be our ambassador to China. An interesting story on Terry. Every time I spoke in Iowa, he'd say, please don't say anything bad about China. I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? He said, I like China, and we do a lot of business with China, and really, just don't. And I said, So when it came time to picking an ambassador, I called him up. I said, you like China? And I can tell you, China is very, very happy with that choice. So we made everybody happy. Right? These governors, thank you, and thank you, Terry. These governors have been bold reformers, and their success shows why we need to make states the laboratories of democracy once again. Many of you have shared past frustrations with waiting for permission from federal government and agencies, and I understand that, and I've had many people tell me about it, and it's been catastrophic for some of your states. You know your citizens, and you know they want things done, but they don't get things done, and it's not your fault. Sometimes it's your fault, but they understand that, but sometimes it's not your fault. We're going to speed it up, because that's not how a partnership is supposed to work. The government should not stand in your way in delivering needed reforms and services, and it won't. We're going to move very, very quickly, environmentally, with Scott and so many others that are involved in the process of regulation. We are going to be cutting. We're going to be doing the right thing. We're going to be protecting people environmentally and safety-wise, but we're going to be moving it quickly, very quickly. And I can, speaking of that, I know many of you, and I've spoken to some of you last night about it, have many projects that are just literally tied up because of environmental concerns, and it's been in for years and years and years. The project your state wants, great for employment. Everybody wants them, and they couldn't get them out of environmental protection, and we will get them out. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to be approved, but they'll be rejected quickly. One way or the other. They'll be either rejected quickly or they're going to get approved. I would say most will be approved. But you're going to know you're not going to wait 9 years or 11 years, some of the horror stories that I've heard. Under my administration, we're going to have a true partnership of collaboration and cooperation. We will get to the answers, and we will get them quickly. And the flexibility you need to implement the reforms that you are going to have in order to make decision-making proper and decision-making fast. So we're going to do both those things, proper and fast. One of the most important responsibilities for the federal government is the budget of the United States. My first budget will be submitted to the Congress next month. This budget will be a public safety and national security budget, very much based on those two, with plenty of other things, but very strong. And it will include a historic increase in defense spending to rebuild the depleted military of the United States of America at a time we most need it. And you'll be hearing about that tomorrow night in great detail. This is a landmark event, a message to the world in these dangerous times of American strength, security, and resolve. We must ensure that our courageous service men and women have the tools they need to deter war, and when called upon to fight in our name, only do one thing: win. We have to win. We have to start winning wars again. I have to say, when I was young in high school and college, everybody used to say, we never lost a war. We never lost a war. You remember. Some of you are right there with me, and you remember we never lost a war. America never lost. And now we never win a war. We never win. And we don't fight to win. We don't fight to win. So we either got to win or don't fight it at all. But where we are, 17 years, almost 17 years of fighting in the Middle East, we're up, I saw a chart the other day, as of about a month ago, $6 trillion we've spent in the Middle East. $6 trillion. And I want to tell you, that's just unacceptable. And we're nowhere. Actually, if you think about it, we're less than nowhere. The Middle East is far worse than it was 16, 17 years ago. There's not even a contest. So we've spent $6 trillion. We have a hornet's nest. It's a mess like you've never seen before. We're nowhere. So we're going to straighten it out. This defense spending increase will be offset and paid for by finding greater savings and efficiencies across the federal government. We're going to do more with less. I got involved in an airplane contract. I got involved in some other contracts, and we cut the hell out of the prices. I mean, we saved a lot of money, tremendous amount of money, beyond anything that the generals that were involved, they said they've never seen anything like this before. On one plane, on a small order of one plane, I saved $725 million. And I would say I devoted about, if I added up all the calls, probably about an hour. So I think that might be my highest and best use. Because if we can do that, our budget might be my highest and best use. And there are many other places it's all the same. And in one way, that's a good thing, because we have an answer. David is going to do a fantastic job at the VA. I say David is sitting there shaking his head. Stand up, David. So we can't get our people through cabinet, but he went through, was it 95 to nothing? How the hell did you do that? Boy, oh boy, he must be good. You were the one. 100 to 0. Wow. Shows you, hey, we can do it. But we do. We have still quite a few cabinet members, and they're just in limbo, waiting. It's like obstruction. It's obstruction. And but eventually we'll get them, and they'll put their people in, and we'll get those agencies, et cetera, to work. We're going to do more with less and make the government lean and accountable to the people. We can do so much more with the money we spend. With the $20 trillion in debt, can you imagine that? The government must learn to tighten its belt, something families all across the country have had to learn to do, unfortunately, but they've had to learn to do it, and they've done it well. My budget increases spending, and the increase in all spending for federal law enforcement also, and activities having to do with law enforcement, will be substantially increased, and we will fight violent crime. You look at what's happening in our cities. You look at what's happening in Chicago. What's going on in Chicago? We will fight violent crime, and we will win, and we'll win that one fairly quickly. Once we give the local police, the local law enforcement, the right to go in and fight it, and we back them monetarily and also otherwise, we're going to win that one. We're going to win it fairly quickly, I believe. My budget also puts America first by keeping tax dollars in America to help veterans and first responders. So important. This budget follows through on my promise to focus on keeping Americans safe, keeping out terrorists, keeping out criminals, and putting violent offenders behind bars or removing them from our country altogether. And I must say that we've been treated very well, very, very well, on the job that General Kelly has done at the border. It's tough, it's strong. I was talking last night to Terry McAuliffe, and he said, you have to mention this, because he met with, where is Terry? He's around here someplace. Terry, he met with General Kelly, and I think I can say you were impressed with General Kelly. And he said, you have to get the point out that they're removing the bad ones. And that's where our focus is. It's the bad ones. We're getting some very, very bad players out of this country. Drug lords, gang members, heads of gangs, killers, murderers. We're getting them out. That's what we're focused on. The press isn't covering that, unfortunately, but it's something that is very important. We're getting the bad ones out, and that's always where I said I was going to start. I was going to start with these bad players, and they are bad. They are rough and tough, and we're getting them the hell out of our country, and we're bringing them to where they started out. Let their country do what they have to do with them. So the budget, which is going to be a very big part of tomorrow night's speech, is going to be, I think, a budget of great rationality, but it's going to have to do with military, safety, economic development, and things such as that. Great detail tomorrow night. We're also going to do whatever we can to restore the authority of the states when that is the appropriate thing to do. We're going to give you back a lot of the powers that have been taken away from states and great people and great governors. And you can control it better than the federal government because you're right on top of it. You have something that's controllable. So I think that's going to be very important. You see that already taking effect. We have to let the states compete and to see who has the best solutions. They know the best how to spend their dollars and how to take care of the people within each state. And states are different, and people are different. So the governors are going to have a lot more decision-making ability than they have right now. All states will benefit from our economic agenda. We will reduce taxes very, very substantially and simplify the tax code. We're also going to make taxes between countries much more fair. We're one of the only countries in the world that people can sell their product into us and have no tax, no nothing, and they get rich. And yet if you want to do business with them, you'll have taxes I've seen as high as 100%. So they sell into us, no problem. We sell into them because we don't sell in because the tax is so high that they don't want us to sell into them. So I know that's always been a point of contention, but to me, it's just fair. It's just fair. It's reciprocal. It's fair. And so we're going to be doing a lot of work on that, and that's becoming a very, very important factor, fairness, because I believe in free trade. I want so much trade. You know, somebody said, oh, maybe he's a total nationalist, which I am in a true sense. But I want trade. I want great trade between countries. But the word free is very deceiving because it's good for them, it's not good for us. I want fair trade. And if we're going to be taxed, they should be taxed at the same amount, the other countries. And one of two things is going to happen. We're going to make a lot of money, or the other country is going to get rid of its tax. And that's good too, because now the product, like Harley Davidson, I was talking to them, the product will now flow into other countries where right now they can't do it. So we're going to make it easier for states to invest in infrastructure, and I'm going to have a big statement tomorrow night on infrastructure. We spend $6 trillion in the Middle East, and we have potholes all over our highways and our roads. I have a friend who's in the trucking business. He said, my trucks are destroyed going from New York to Los Angeles. They're destroyed. He said, I'm not going to get the good trucks anymore. He always prided himself on buying the best equipment. He said the roads are so bad that by the time we make the journey from New York to Los Angeles or back, he said the equipment is just beat to hell. I said, when has it been like that before? He said it's never. He's been in the business for 40 years. He said it's never been like that. 40 years, never been like that. So we're going to take care of that. Infrastructure, we're going to start spending on infrastructure big. And not like we have a choice. It's not like, oh, gee, let's hold it off. Our highways, our bridges are unsafe. Our tunnels, I mean, we have tunnels in New York where the tiles are on the ceiling and you see many tiles missing. And you wonder, you know, you're driving 40 miles an hour, 50 miles an hour through a tunnel. You take a look at the Lincoln Tunnel and the Queens Midtown Tunnel, and you're driving and you see all this loose material that's heavy. You know, it was made many years ago, so it's heavy. Today it's light. Used to be better. The problem is you got to hold it up. And I say to myself, every time I drive through, I say, man, I wonder how many people are hurt or injured when they're driving at 40, 50 miles an hour through a tunnel and a tile falls off. And there's so many missing tiles and such loose concrete. So we have to fix our infrastructure. It's not like we have a choice. We have no choice. And we're going to do it. And it also happens to mean jobs, which is a good thing. We're going to repeal and replace Obamacare and get states the flexibility that they need to make the end result really, really good for them. Very complicated issue. We have Tom Price, just got confirmed, sitting here. Stand up, Tom. And I spent a lot of time with Governor Walker and Governor Rick Scott the other day. We were talking about it. They're really very expert on the subject, and I want to thank them. They spent a lot of time with me. Governor Christie, who's here someplace. Where's Chris? Governor Christie. Thank you. And so we have a lot of talent and a lot of expertise here, I will tell you. And we have come up with a solution that's really, really, I think, very good. Now, I have to tell you, it's an unbelievably complex subject. Nobody knew that healthcare could be so complicated. And statutorily and for budget purposes, as you know, we have to do healthcare before we do the tax cut. The tax cut is going to be major, it's going to be simple, and the whole tax plan is wonderful, but I can't do it until we do healthcare because we have to know what the health care is going to cost, and statutorily that's the way it is. So for those people that say, oh gee, I wish we could do, you know, the tax first, it just doesn't work that way. I would like to do that first. It's actually, tax cutting has never been that easy, but it's a tiny little ant compared to what we're talking about with Obamacare. And you have to remember, and I say this to Democrats in the room, of which we have many, Obamacare has failed. If you go to Minnesota, where they had a 66% increase, and the governor of Minnesota, who's with us today, said Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is no longer affordable, something to that effect. I think that might be it exactly, but the Affordable Care Act is no longer affordable. Obamacare has failed. I say to the Republicans, if you really want to do politically something good, don't do anything. Sit back for a period of 2 years, because 17 is going to be a disaster for Obamacare if we don't do something. Let it be a disaster, because we can blame that on the Dems that are in our room, and we can blame that on the Democrats and President Obama. Let it implode. And then let it implode in 18 even worse. Don't do anything. And they will come begging for us to do something. But that's not the fair thing to do for the people. Not the fair thing. Politically, I think it would be a great solution. Because as soon as we touch it, if we do the most minute thing, just a tiny little change, what's going to happen? They're going to say, it's the Republicans' problem. That's the way it is. But we have to do what's right, because Obamacare is a failed disaster. And it's interesting. It's sort of like when you see it with politicians. You see it with President Obama. When you know he's getting out of office and the clock is ticking and he's not going to be there, his approval rating goes way up. Even though, not that active in the last period of time, the approval rating goes up. That's not him. That's like almost everybody. I see it happening with Obamacare. People hate it, but now they see that the end is coming, and they're saying, oh, maybe we love it. There's nothing to love. It's a disaster, folks, okay? So you have to remember that. And very importantly, we are going to work to restore local control to our nation's education system. Betsy's here someplace, and she is going to be, I think, fantastic. I think she's going to be fantastic. Stand up, Betsy. Betsy feels so strongly, and she's had such support from so many people. You don't see that too much because you see the anti, you never see the positive. But I can tell you, I've had so many calls while she was going through that horrible process. That was a tough, nasty process. And she hung in. She was strong as you get. But so many people were calling Betsy saying, you will do such a fantastic job once you get it. It's like sometimes I'd say it's much tougher to get into Harvard than it is to stay there. Does that make sense? It's tougher to get into the Wharton School of Finance. You can't get in. But if you get in, it's fine. You get through, right? I think you're going to do a fantastic job, and we're very proud of you. And you took a lot of heat, but you're going to do great. So she wants to bring decision-making powers back to parents, back to the families, and back to the states, where they can really control education. And just finally, I'm looking forward to working with you on these projects and so much more. We're going to do these projects and so many more. And I thank you all again for being here. It's going to be a really productive discussion, so productive that I'm going to ask the press to start leaving, because I wouldn't want them to see any great productive session, but they'll be seeing it and hearing about it.
All right, folks, so that concluded President Trump. Thank you very much for joining us today for the presser, and also I just wanted to bring you guys what he said earlier today. And don't forget, right underneath the video is the link for President Trump's address to Congress. It happens tomorrow afternoon. Do not miss it. It's going to be awesome, and we're going to stream it here live for you guys. So again, the link is underneath the video. Make sure to go and give it a thumbs up. Set the notification, because YouTube allows you to set the notification for that live stream. It's going to happen tomorrow evening, so don't miss it here on Golden State Times. Thank you very much for all those that came through, shared our stream, and always giving us your support. We appreciate it very much. Thank you to all of the mods that came through. We always appreciate you. And I hope that you guys enjoyed. And Sean Spicer is doing a wonderful job in keeping everything, in keeping the mainstream media at bay, and that way they don't go rampant on him. But one thing that I do think that he needs to do is he needs to make sure to not give one reporter too many questions, right? One, maybe two at most. If the second one is a good question, that is it. No more. He has to do a little bit better of a job in cutting down those questions from people that just want to ask the exact same question over and over and over again. So yeah, guys, thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned on the channel for the rest, for today. We might have another live stream coming up soon, but we will upload breaking news stories later on today. So don't miss it. Thank you very much. Hope to see you guys here later on today. Hope to see you guys here tomorrow evening. Let people know that you guys are going to see it here at Golden State Times. And thank you very much. Peace.